Hello, this is Digital Accessibility, the people behind the progress. I'm Joe Walensky, the creator and host of this series. And as an accessibility professional myself, I find it very interesting as to how others have found their way into this profession. So let's meet one of those people right now and hear about their journey. All right, well, here we go with another episode where I have the great opportunity to meet another accessibility practitioner and find out a little bit about them. And today I'm meeting with Kersey. Hello, Ian. How are you today?
Hey, good. How are you, Joe?
Everything's going well. And as mostly usual, I'm at my home office on Vashon Island, which is near Blink's Seattle headquarters. Where are you talking to us from?
I'm actually in Kansas City, Missouri. So yeah, the heartland, I suppose.
All right. Is that where you're based at?
Yeah, I'm actually fully remote right now, but I actually just moved here about a year ago from the West Coast. So I was in Oregon for a long time. So familiar with Seattle.
All right, great. I just, my wife and I spent a lot of time on the Oregon coast at the start of this year. We made 3 trips and kind of worked our way through all of it. So it's always it's a great state with a lot of cool stuff to see.
Yeah, for sure. I really love the coast there. Yeah.
Well, talk to me a little bit about what you're up to right now. That's always a good place to start.
Yeah, for sure. Well, right now I'm a senior accessibility specialist at Thomson Reuters. And before I get going, I also want to mention that everything I say here today, my opinions are my own and don't reflect Thomson Reuters. So just put that out there. Yeah, but I do a lot of, I do a lot of stuff. What I do there is we're really in a point where we're shifting left pretty hard at Thomson Reuters. So, I interact with pretty much everybody from designers to developers. So I'm involved in kind of the life cycle of a product. We have a lot of products there that are, of course, there's the right. Most people are probably more familiar with the Writers News Service. That's a part of Thomson Reuters, but we also have a bunch of law programs and stuff like that too. So software that lawyers use and things like that. So some really kind of interesting stuff to work on. Mainly what I focus on is the customer facing side of kind of Thomson Reuters. So of some of the products there.
Well, I'm sure you have a lot of different things going on, but kind of what's a day in the life or a week in the life work life like for you? Are there any particular things that are always going on or any particular tasks that are critical to what you're involved in?
Yeah, for sure. So, we do, work agile, so we work in sprints. Depending on the cycle of the sprints, I'll be working. So like for this week, for instance, we're in a more design heavy sprint. And then after that ends, that work will go to development. So right now I'm just kind of, hanging out with the designers as they're doing their work, kind of reviewing their work. I really am a part of the design process, it feels like. So there's a lot of that going on. So this week is a lot of design stuff, which I love because I also have a design background. So I really love getting in there and also just kind of, being able to impart kind of some accessibility knowledge onto the designers too, which is really critical in that kind of shift left kind of mentality. And then, as we do the development, there's kind of like the handoff. So there's, I'll meet with the developers and just tell them like, hey, like, here's what the designs are. Here's some concerns for accessibility. One thing I did just leave out there is annotations. So we do a lot of our work in Figma, the design work, and we'll actually go into Figma and make accessibility notations on those Figma files. So that's also a part I really enjoy. So by the time we hand off to dev, we just try to make sure that we've given the devs, anything they can possibly have, right, to make their thing accessible. So all of our annotations link back to some acceptance criteria, which are pretty similar to, it's the kind of thing where it's like we tell the developers how it should be coded accessibly and all that kind of stuff. So we have that repository as well. So we just try to give the devs all they need before they get coding.
How's it? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So after that, it's just kind of, accessibility testing, logging bugs if there are any bugs, and then reviewing those bugs with the developers.
How is accessibility set up generally in your organization? So you mentioned the things that you do. Are you or your colleagues tied to certain products or parts of the organization, or is it more of take across the spectrum and you provide support in different areas?
Yeah, it's kind of all of the above, right? Like we do have. I'm in a group that is tied to a certain specific kind of umbrella of products, right? So and we call them pods, but they're just kind of little, well, they're not little, but they're groupings, right? So we do have work that is tied to specific pods and products. There's also a team that is focused on, say like the Reuters website or other kind of work that's going around. So we do have like some accessibility specialists that are kind of floating around, right? Just kind of picking up whatever work is out there. It's just such a large company. We have so many products that it's really just kind of, yeah. So.
Well, if for anybody that's heard any of our episodes, one of the things I always like to get into is hear about the path that people took to get where they are today in accessibility. And so we're going to start with you. Where were some of your first exposures to something that, maybe started to lead you to professional interest in this area?
Yeah, so so I've been a web developer for about, I think 8 years now. I kind of dabbled in it, but I got really serious about it about 8 years ago. And then kind of a couple of years into that, I decided to go back to college because I never got a degree. So I decided like, hey, let's go do that. So when I did that, I went to a community college to start out. And while I was there, I was just looking for a part-time kind of job. And I got a job at the accessibility office at the community college. So there, I got to do a whole variety of things. I got to do a lot of technical things. So I got to do stuff like, textbook PDF remediation, showing students how to use certain assistive technologies like smart pens and stuff like that. So, studying strategies and things like that. So a lot of work directly with students with disabilities. I also was in the classroom sometimes with some students, just, scribing, taking notes, maybe manipulating materials and stuff like that. So that was really kind of like the eye-opening experience for me, right? Like I've always had kind of a social justice activist streak in me, but I never really had focused on, accessibility before or accommodations and things like that. So a lot of the stuff the barriers that I saw in the college setting really kind of opened my eyes to like, wow, there's a lot of work here that needs to be done, right? There's a lot of inequities here that are built into the environment. And I would like to be a part of that, be a part of the change to help get rid of those barriers in any way that I can. So that's kind of how I got started. I did that for a while, and then I got a job at a small company a consulting accessibility company. So doing audits of websites and stuff like that. Very similar to Level Access or DQ. So I kind of started cut my teeth on testing there, and then eventually moved my way over to Level Access. And I was there for a while before coming to Thomson Reuters. So.
Well, you mentioned your work in the academic institution. That's definitely a place where we've heard a lot of people had their had their start because there is so much accessibility needed and going on there. And then you also mentioned that you already had come in with some work experience in the coding area, I think, and so that sounds like you were well placed to get going. I imagine when you moved from the academic to the consulting side, or maybe I should assume that it was a lot different. But what did you think about that experience? How did that fill out that next step in your career growth?
Yeah, I liked it. I did, it really exercised my technical side, right? Like I was able to call on my development background a little bit more. And at that point too, when I had been doing web development before, I, heard of ARIA and things like that, right? But I never really had used it a lot. So it's kind of that unfortunate thing about, developers aren't really taught about accessibility when you learn about development, right? So I really sharpened my skills there, and that was really cool. I loved just kind of, that was when I kind of memorized WCAG and looked at all these other standards and got to learn how to, code things in a way that would be accessible. So that was cool. I did really miss working with the students directly. That was kind of a thing that I really enjoyed doing. But it's interesting because I was, instead of being directly with students and kind of working on accessibility directly with people, I was doing it for companies that would eventually make their products better, more accessible for people with disabilities. So at the end of the day, I felt like I was still doing the work that I wanted to do. It was still that kind of that work, but it was just a little bit different. Yeah, and I think overall, I liked consulting, but there's also a part of me that really, I like my position now because I'm at a company where I can see things through, right? I can kind of see the change happen. When you're consulting, it's kind of like you get the work, you do it, you hand it back off, right? And that's fine, but you never really get to sit with that company and see the progress they've made, right? So.
Yeah. And when you're doing the consulting work, was there a certain part of the process you were involved in? Was it more on the checking in once things had been built and identifying issues? Or I believe you mentioned shift left early on, the idea about getting involved in accessibility at the earliest stages of product development. So what was it like in your experience in the consulting area? Was it all over the place, or was it more kind of end of the line versus the start?
Yeah, I would say, that most of it was kind of like, unfortunately, that it was like a lawsuit driven mostly, right? So people would come to us, they say like, hey, we got a demand letter, we got to fix our stuff. That wasn't always the case. There were some places that some companies that I consulted with that were doing accessibility. They didn't have like an in-house team, so they would have us do it, right? So they were in the place where they were not just kind of combating that kind of swirl of just making stuff and then kind of trying to patch it up, right? So, but I would say that, like, honestly, a lot of what I saw was, we got a demand letter, we got to fix this thing, and so that was challenging because those are valid points, but for me, the business case isn't why I'm in accessibility, right? Like, I'm in accessibility to make things better for people, and I guess one could argue that lawsuits do maybe eventually make things more accessible, but culture-wise, I think that really focusing on the people that you're affecting is the way to go.
So then what was the next stage after that? What did you start working with after that part of your career?
So I would say that at least when I got more towards the end of my consulting, which like around January of this year is when I hopped to Thomson Reuters. So about like the last 6 months of that role, I was actually doing more of the leading clients in their accessibility efforts too. So it was less of the kind of heads down, just testing all the time, to like, okay, we've got your reports now. Let's figure out how we're going to incorporate this into your workflow and stuff like that, and or just even prioritizing things with the company, meeting with stakeholders, and kind of, so more of that, the not the human focus side, but less of just the straight up testing and more of the kind of client stuff. But yeah, now I'm Thomson Reuters, so it's definitely a completely different position. Like I almost don't do any testing anymore. Like I do some testing, but we have a testing team that does that. So so yeah, for me, it's mostly, a lot of design work, a lot of meeting with people.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Well, it's so I imagine that since you're doing all the work that you already mentioned that you're doing there, that there's strong commitment from maybe the leading parts of the organization that have made that possible. Is that the case? It sounds like you're well placed to have the resources and things to bring it into all the different product groups.
Yeah, no, it really is, and that was why I was so excited about the position. It just, they really have a great commitment to accessibility, and it, and we do have a lot of resources for it, so it feels like a good place to be. I know a lot of companies have, over the last year or so, they're starting to, look for more accessibility professionals, and I think that that's great. But there are some job postings that I saw that I was kind of like, ooh, I'm not sure if, they might have one person or two people for a big company, and I'm like, I don't know, that's going to be rough, right? To put it nicely. But like, I do think that any commitment to accessibility is great. But the position I'm in right now is awesome to have a great team to work with and support, and also just other accessibility professionals you can just talk to, because nothing's cut and dry with digital accessibility, right? Like, there's that old joke, you can put, maybe not so old, but you can put 5 accessibility professionals in a room and ask them one question, and you're going to get 10 different answers for something, right? So it's just nice to bounce things off of people, and then also have people with different abilities on your team too. So you can really be like, I can be like, hey, like, I know how to use a screen reader as a sighted person, but like, what is it really like for other people, right? And we also do like, user testing and stuff like that. So that's also a great piece that I like, is actually going out to the users and seeing what their experience is, and expanding from there. So.
Well, with a large organization like yours, with so many different things going on, how is it set up in terms of making sure that accessibility embeds itself throughout the organization? Are there certain standards or levels for groups to get involved with it, or is there or does each group kind of find their way with support from people like yourself? Kind of how is that set up?
Yeah, so we really are, trying to we're putting basically specialists like myself in every, trying to put them in every pod that's possible, right? And then in places where people kind of float around, or maybe go from a different project to a different project, it's kind of like creating those connections, right? Creating those connections with design, with development, all the different teams, letting them know that you're here, right? And then, from there, it's really going to all of the meetings, just getting into those meetings and saying, hey, everyone, like, I'm Ian, I'm here, like, this is what I do. And then over time, you just build that relationship with those people, and you show up at meetings, and or you do reviews and stuff like that, and you really just become a part of that team. So there's a lot of education, for teams that haven't worked with specialists before, had specialists embedded in their team. At first it's kind of like, people aren't really sure what your position is or what you're really doing there. Like, are you here just to review stuff? Like, whatever. But really, it's about being part of that process. And what I've seen over the last 6 months is that, now I'm embedded with my designers, I'm embedded with my developers. They don't think twice about reaching out to me, in a process, a workflow process. I can always reach out to them. So yeah, that's really the idea, and of course these things take time, and, with these kinds of kind of like shifts, right? Like of getting people in there, but that's the idea, is just get us in everywhere we can. And along with that is the education piece as well. I know some companies have kind of like, they have like accessibility champion kind of projects, which are great too, where you have like maybe, some developers that kind of are focused on doing accessibility for a couple months, or they have weekly meetups and they talk about it, right? Like accessibility isn't their sole focus, but they really do like get in there and try to champion accessibility. And I think we're doing a similar approach, but I'm doing that with everybody, right? Like our idea is to get everybody knowledgeable about accessibility, not just a few people. And there are also, efforts from our internal communication and stuff like that to like on how to create accessible documents, right? And stuff like that. So even maybe some of the people on the account side or on the other sides that aren't in the design side of the house, they also are getting communications about, how to create accessible documents. And we do have, and then also having like what do we call it? Just like a measurement, right? Like a measurement of the whole kind of health, accessibility health of the whole organization, that we're all striving to meet a certain goal there too. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, so you mentioned some of the things that you're working on right now moving forward. And so, one of the things I like to ask as well is just kind of looking ahead, if you have any thoughts, a couple different ways, possibly you have some, initiatives that you're excited about that you're able to discuss, or possibly just things from your own career that you're kind of looking forward to making some moves into areas that hadn't been, possible in the past for whatever reason. Has anything come to mind in those areas?
Yeah, I have just recently gotten involved in the WCAG AG meeting. So I've been involved with Thomson Reuters in the WCAG meetings, which is like, it's almost like a dream, right? For me, it feels kind of surreal to be at a point where I'm actually in some of those meetings and talking about, crafting silver, like, 3.0 and stuff like that. I'm still at that point where I'm just trying to absorb everything. So I just kind of go to the meetings and I'm like, okay, like, but I'm really excited to just be a part of that whole process. And another thing I would like to kind of do that I've been thinking about personally is just kind of trying to find more bodies of research to drive some design decisions that are more linked to accessibility. There's like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Nielsen Norman group, who does a lot of kind of UX. They have a lot of UX documentation and kind of best practices and things like that, all driven by user research. I would love to, maybe somehow get more of that, but focus on accessibility. So I feel like a lot of times, when I talk to people about accessibility, it's digital accessibility. There's always WCAG, which of course is the bare minimum that we can do, right? But we need to go beyond that. And I feel like the only way we're going to be able to go beyond that is to get user experiences and maybe some research as well. So I don't know what that looks like, but that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Is just, it would be really cool to get some more of that going. So
yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And it, sometimes it can be difficult, nowadays where, maybe people aren't able to share as much, as they'd like because of, security concerns within their organizations. Of course, that limits our knowledge base. But we do have things like the IAAP, which has a pretty good knowledge base. And just to call that out, we talked a bit before, you have the 2 certifications from there as well.
Yeah, totally.
And so that you have the CPAC and the WAS, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, other than that, are there any things that kind of you're really looking forward to in the immediate future that you want to jump into? Is there just keeping up with all the many things that are happening every day?
Yeah, just keeping up with everything. I'm, continuing to just grow my relationships at work, but also, like throughout the accessibility community, which is, I'm excited to do this as well, to do that. So, that's really what I'm just trying to focus on right now. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me about this, and possibly we'll connect up in the real world sometime at a conference or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be great.